And we are live. Hey, Dave, how are you?
I'm doing well, David. How are you?
Doing very, very well. Super happy to be here with you again. So, returning guest on the Papa PhD podcast, David Giltner, and now we're really at the start of this live recording. But if you can show us this new thing that you have,
Oh
that
yeah, this
that was
book.
yes, it was in the works when we talked last time.
It was, yes, and I didn't have it out yet. Now I do, and I'm very pleased to have it out. So, I mean, thank
Mm,
you so much for bringing me back. It's great. It was great to talk to you before, and I'm really happy to be back.
My pleasure, my pleasure. I'll actually share a link that Dave has given me later on to let anyone watching or listening click and go see about getting this book. It's a game, not a formula. I really like the way you formulated that. But yeah, actually, you know what? I think I'm gonna ask if anyone's watching right now live. Which is not clear to me from here right now. But if someone is, please tell us if the sound is coming up okay. If there's a difference between my volume and Dave's volume, and if everything's fine, just send us a thumbs up in the comments. It's always appreciated. But in the meantime, yeah, Dave, I'm super happy to have you here. It's been almost a year since you were on the show. You were here on the beginning of season 3, and although we're recording this now in August 2022, this episode is going to be part of the kind of the launch of season 4 of Papa PhD. And you know, you have so much to share based on all of the research you've done to write your books and all of the work you've done with people, that it's always a pleasure to have you here and to share all the gold nuggets that you bring with the Papa PhD audience.
Well, thank you. I mean, your series is so great. I'm very happy to be back. I'm impressed with everything you do with it, with the wide range, the diversity of guests you have, the interesting things they have to talk about. So I'm very pleased to be back. So thank you.
Well, it's mutual. So, Dave, what this again is going to happen like the
Mhm.
other time that you came. I think things are looking okay in terms of the stream. Um, Maybe something on Facebook, but there's nothing I can do from about it now. If you are on Facebook or Twitter, I would ask you to either join us on LinkedIn or even preferably on the YouTube channel of Papa PhD if you want to watch the recording live. So I'm going to close the feed on both those platforms now. Meet us on the Papa PhD YouTube channel, and if you're on LinkedIn, that's always also a great platform. Actually, it's the platform where Dave has said he's most active. So if after this interview you're interested and you want to continue the conversation with Dave, just find him on LinkedIn. So I will then close the feed here and on Twitter like this. Voila. And we are ready to go. So, welcome to this new episode of Papa PhD. Today, I have the great pleasure of having with me friend of the show and returning guest, David Giltner. Dave, super happy to have you here. Last time there was a book in the works, and this time you have the book. Too bad
Check it out.
you can't give it to me through the camera. That would be
I know.
great technology.
Don't have that technology yet. I can't beam it to you, but I
One
do
day.
have the book. Yeah.
One day. Can you tell us a little bit about the book? The
Yeah,
title, what it's about?
absolutely. So the title is "It's a Game, Not a Formula." That's a kind of a tagline I've come up with. The subtitle is "How to Succeed as a Scientist Working in the Private Sector." And so
Very good.
that's, if you know something about me, that's really what my work is with Turning Science. It's about helping scientists work in the private sector. And I like to say either as employees, as entrepreneurs, I do a fair amount of mentoring of startups and entrepreneurs, or as academic collaborators. I actually
Hmm.
have a workshop for scientists who want to work at a university as a professor, the traditional role, if you will, but want to collaborate with the private sector. And what it's about is this: it's a game, not a formula, is something I've kind of put together in the last 5, 6 years as I've really built this up, realizing that one of the challenges we have, and maybe all PhDs do, but certainly scientists do, is we develop a habit of looking for the right answer. That's what we
Mm-hmm.
do as a scientist, right? We're trying to unlock, formulas, theories, models that explain how things work, and there's a right answer. We tend to approach our careers in the same way, and that
Mm-hmm.
becomes a problem. And so the title is to encourage people to think differently. When you're working on your career, and whether it's career itself, or this leadership, or this being successful in your career, there's no single right answer. There are many ways to win, much like a game. That's what makes games interesting, is many ways to win. It's about taking risks. You have to do things where you don't know what the outcome is going to be, much like in a game where you have to take the shot or play your hand or move your chess piece, whatever the game is. And it's not just about knowledge. We are used to the fact that we're intelligent and we know a lot. Knowledge is power, but it really goes beyond that. Much like a game, it's the risk taking, it's the trying different things. Just knowing the right answer isn't the way you get there. I like to say, so you go back to a game analogy or a sports analogy, knowing the rules better than anyone is not how you become an excellent player. That's how you become a referee.
Yeah,
So do you want to be a ref, or do you want to score points? Most of us want to score points. So
that's a great that's a great analogy. Yeah. So, Dave, for those who haven't had the pleasure of listening to your first interview, can you just tell us how you came about? This book is coming from reflections you've had from meeting people, from coaching people. But can you tell us what was the journey before that? What brought you to this space of helping people, manage their careers as scientists, or as former scientists,
yeah.
or as pivoting scientists?
hmm Sure. So I guess it started when I finished grad school. My PhD, I'm a physicist, so I have a PhD in physics, and I decided not to follow that traditional route to become a professor. I say traditional, turns out most of us end up in the private sector anyway. So
Yeah.
that's just what most people in academia still imagine as the traditional role. That challenge of making that transition and figuring it out, it was a big challenge for me, and it was for many of us. But this part of the journey really started with another book I wrote back in 2010, Turning Science into Things People Need.
Hmm.
And it was just done as a side project between jobs. I interviewed a bunch of scientists who had worked in the private sector and thought this would be a good guide for people who were doing it now. But that really set me off on this path that started just as a speaking gig. I'd speak at universities now and then, and it really grew into something much bigger. So it was 2020. Well, frankly, the pandemic was instrumental. I had developed all these ideas for around this whole topic of working in the private sector. And when travel bans and things were implemented in 2020, I realized I'm not going to be traveling, giving my workshops and seminars like I usually do. It seemed like the right opportunity to write this second book and to get my own ideas out. The first one was just interviews. It was awesome, but it wasn't any of my own ideas.
Hmm.
By that time, I had developed a lot of my own principles, much like this theme. It's a game, not a formula. So that was the opportunity to actually put it into a book. I interviewed many more scientists. I've interviewed a lot of managers
Hmm.
around, what do they struggle with? How do they see scientists struggle making the transition? So it's not just my own ideas. It's really a lot of wisdom I've gotten from other
Yeah.
scientists and industry managers on how to make that transition better.
Hmm. I really love that you've put the effort to write and put out something like that, because the world, it's kind of another planet industry, right? It's
Yeah.
it's even kind of, when the word has this gravitas to it, that is even this weight, and to have this resource to learn about it, to hear, the knowledge that you've accrued based on talking with people who are in there, I'm sure is helpful to a lot of people. There's a lot of unknown, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of how can I say, you
Preconceived
know
ideas or
yeah, preconceived or
yeah,
acquired ideas that are often negative.
yeah.
So that's why I really, really love having you here each time, because with you, we're able to quickly debunk a lot of that and go into the meat of it, and to how interesting it can be, how stimulating it can be, and what a great avenue it can be for a lot of people coming out with higher education degrees. Yeah. So today, for the listeners, I was talking with Dave, and he suggested something that has never been covered on the show, and it was his suggestion, and I grabbed it as soon as he mentioned it, which was this question of accessing positions of influence and responsibility and leadership,
Mhm.
and in outside the academic structure, let's say, so in the private or in any, it could be in government or any other organization. But there's a lot of taboo around that, I feel. There's a it's sometimes you can have a feeling that it's for a select club of people.
Right.
If you're an introvert, you might think, okay, this is not for me, and that's why I'm really really curious I'm really curious about the reflections you've had on that, and about what's your take, and what's maybe what conversations maybe you've had with people, like you said, who accessed like managerial and anyway leadership positions once they pivoted career. Can you talk a little bit about maybe maybe an example, or anyway, because you've
Yeah.
written the book and I'm sure you have stuff ready to say. I'm going to kind of let you go, but I'm really curious on the process. How do you get to a position like this? Because I imagine it's not just at the click of a of a finger.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely true. And so one way I think of it is, so backing up, you said industry seems very different than academia, and that is true in many ways. Now, people can certainly work in both, and that's one of the things I do, but the rules of success are different.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, some of those rules that are different are really critical to getting into a position of leadership or of influence. That's one way to think of it right there. Is leadership is really about influence, and persuasion is a tool that we don't often think about too much in, say, in science. I mean, we think more in terms of proof, right? That's the idea. Many scientists imagine, I just gather the right data, and as I present it, then that proves my point, and I don't have to worry about influencing people. I don't need to persuade them, right? But that's actually a really important part of leadership. Another important part is making decisions. Uh, it's not a definition of leadership, but being a good leader is really about being able to make decisions. I like to say, when there's no right answer. It starts with not having all the data you might like to have, which is also not science. Typically, you don't publish a paper until you've got enough data you can say, yep, I'm very confident, I know the answer, and I publish it. That is not the way the private sector works. To be a leader, you need to make decisions without a lot of data, and frankly, when there's not a right answer. I like to say, if we had the right answer, we don't really need the leader, right? Maybe a manager, but not. We just say, oh, it's clearly the right path, and we will all head in that direction. But there are many questions where there is no right answer, and somebody has to decide how to do that. We scientists tend to be pretty uncomfortable with that overall. Certainly not all of us, but many of us, because we've been used to saying, I don't have to take that risk. I just keep analyzing, collecting more data, and I put together the right answer. I find out the right answer. And that's very valuable. That's a great thing about how science works. But you get to the private sector, there's a lot of things that just don't have right answers. So influence, persuading people is a key skill we don't really often pick up in academia. And some advisors are great at managing their research teams to do that, but many are not. Most are not, I think. So making decisions quickly. Another element of it is, I like to say, figuring out what matters and what doesn't. Now, these three are all important in your career in general, but they're particularly true for being a leader. You just don't have time to do everything. Science, again, is about being very thorough. You want to be very complete before you publish your results. But in the private sector, you have to move quickly. If you're doing anything worthwhile, you will have competition. That means you need to move fast, and you don't have the time to do absolutely everything. You have to pick What are the things that are really going to achieve the results that we need and what are not? That
Hmm.
becomes so important as a leader because it's not just your time you're looking at anymore. I mean, efficiency is always important, but you have to start to think about being effective. You now have a team and you have leverage, right? The things that the ways in which you direct them and lead them now influence more than just you. And so,
Hmm.
really thinking carefully about what are the important things to do and what are the things that need to be set aside becomes important.
Hmm. Yeah, this reminds me of a conversation in one of the early episodes of Papa PhD. Someone in industry saying who told me the difference here in industry is if something, after, if a project doesn't work after 2 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
we drop it and we move to the next one. And it's really not the way things are designed in academia.
Mm-hmm.
So the time frame is completely different, but like you say, it's a whole different mindset.
Oh yeah. Yeah, one of the scientists that I interviewed, he says, work quickly to find out what doesn't work so you find out what does. So what you said about, getting through things quickly. Oh, nope, that won't work. This won't work. Hey, this might work. But even
Hmm.
when you get to the one that seems to work, you still don't really know. So you work forward, you develop, you test it and you see if it works as you move forward. But you often
Hmm.
have to pick that path before you really know if it's going to work.
Yeah. So now the thing that got me curious about what you just said, and also that clicked with me, was it's true that, if you imagine someone coming from, let's say, like me, the life sciences, or
Mhm.
any other hard sciences, uh, it's easy to see the person leave academia, go to R&D, and maybe become a scientist in the private sector,
Mhm. Right.
and again, and do research in that setting, not in a managerial or in a leadership position. But I'm really curious, because again, I always like to share kind of stories or journeys that people don't know of, and I'm really curious about, from the people you've met, what were their path, from being accepted first as a researcher into
Mhm.
industry, which is already, there's challenges there, often just of high people who are hiring, understanding what the person brings to the table. But how then was this kind of evolution to then go into a position of leadership versus being pigeonholed as, well, this person was on the bench, they'll go
Mhm.
work on the bench here in the company.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of that I think I've seen is that even if they're working in a lab at a bench doing technical work that may look more like what they did as an academic research scientist, the ability to, it's the decision making, in short, is
Mm.
that ability to take a risk. They see something and they say, okay, I realize now we have to make a move that doesn't involve me spending the next 2 years in the lab to figure out the right answer. But those who can say, okay, I know enough, I can, here's my recommendation. That's actually where it starts.
Okay.
The manager who maybe is not a scientist or technical at all. This is a good example. We have three different ways we might be able to develop this product. And you, as the scientist, talking to the person we're talking about here, I need you to assess, what do you think is the best way? And if that, when that person is able to quickly, do some research, maybe put together some prototypes, but do something fairly quickly and say, okay, it looks like this is probably it, and I'm willing to now give a recommendation without knowing for sure. I
Hmm.
understand
Hmm.
that's the game. We have to move fast. I understand I won't know for sure, but here's my assessment. The manager then thinks, wow, this is really valuable. They are willing to take that risk. They know we have to move quickly. They aren't coming back and saying, ooh, gee, I really don't know. I need another 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 6 months. That is one of the first things I've noticed that makes
Hmm.
somebody appear to be, maybe you could say, management material. That's kind of private sector lingo. But a better way to look at it is, this person understands the game and they can make decisions and they can really help lead things. That's the first indicator, I think,
Hmm.
that they can do that, because then it's a really powerful combination. You have somebody that understands the technology at a deep level and is able to play the private sector game by taking a risk. That
Hmm.
right there is, it's unfortunately a bit rare.
Hmm. So, and my follow-up question to that is it because, like you say, it's rare that it comes naturally to
Mhm.
people, but is it something that you can learn? Is it a learnable skill? Is it
Mhm.
something that by spending 1 year, 2 years at a in an organization, that you can slowly try to you know get yourself slowly more and more out of your comfort zone and into this frame of mind of taking risks, which is not what you brought back from university.
Right. Absolutely, it can be learned. Certainly some people just have more of a tendency to behave that way in the first place. But
Hmm.
many of us, I mean, I was not naturally that way early on, and I had to learn it. That's part of why I teach that now, because I realize, yes, this is learnable. It starts with awareness, and that's really where I start with this. Kind of a not a wake up call. That's maybe not the right feeling, but sort of a, hey, this is a different game. Even before you head that direction, realize it's a different game you're playing. Because there can be a tendency, a PhD has been trained to be independent. And
Hmm.
there's a tendency to leave our graduate programs and think, okay, I know how the game is played. I know how to do this. But when you move into the private sector, it's different. So it starts with that awareness that this is a different game. Here is what brings success there. But then, of course, there are thinking habits involved. It's not that you just flip a switch and all of a sudden you're thinking in the private sector mode. Many of us have to get to where we're more comfortable making those decisions, where we think naturally, I have to influence people, not just prove it to them. I don't have time to get the data to prove it to them. Or I need to think, what is really critical for this? I don't have the time to do everything. And those are habits that are learned over time. But you
Hmm.
absolutely can get better at those. Yes.
Hmm. Well, and clearly, like, you can get better at those working with you, David Giltner. And I will share. So Dave has a website, and I will share it in the show notes. But the other thing that gets me curious is, the career in academia.
Mhm.
The way I see it, and the way in conversations, the kind of simplified is it's quite linear in a way.
Mhm.
There's some steps you take, some how can I say, you apply to different things, but there's a linear progression towards getting higher and higher in that career and in that
Mhm.
hierarchy. But the feeling I have about conversations that have to do with what happens outside academia in the private sector is that it's the career journey, even within an organization, may not be linear at all.
Right.
Uh, and why I'm asking this is because I imagine two cases. One case of the person who doesn't have that natural talent, let's say, for leadership, but who so gets maybe that R&D position, and then starts to develop it and to develop a taste for it and even skill for it later on.
Mhm.
But also, I'm thinking about that person who might have it already and who might think, oh, I want to go to industry, but I want to start at this position and this salary.
Mhm.
And from the conversations I've had, I feel that often it's not realistic because, it's hard for someone hiring to know in general what a PhD is. Each PhD is different,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
often you'll have to start at a position. You'll have to have some humility as to the first position that you take just after leaving academia. I don't know if this jives with what you observe, but I'd like your reflection on that and on
Yeah.
this, horizontal versus just linear, these kind of zigzag or not non-linear paths of evolution in the industry versus what we're used to, postdoc,
Mhm.
and then teaching, etc.
Yeah, excellent question, and there's kind of a lot to unpack there. So if I miss anything, make sure you bring me back because I've got
Yes,
several
that's
thoughts
my
on that.
error. I always my thoughts branch and I let them do it,
I,
and but I will try and get back and tell you if there's something
I
that's
totally
missing.
get it. My partner and I like to say because everything is connected to everything else,
Yes.
and that's exactly the way we function too, right? One question leads to another, but everything. What you mentioned is an excellent excellent thing to discuss. Let's see. So I'll start with, you're right. In academia, there is a traditional path that goes from PhD, postdoc, uh, another postdoc, assistant professorship. There's a line there. Sometimes it appears from the outside that in the private sector there might be a line, because you can imagine an org chart and some classic roles, right? Okay, a scientist and then a manager and then a director and a vice president. But there really is a lot more flexibility than that. My career has done that. You can move laterally, you can move into another organization, you can learn a whole different aspect of the business, even as a scientist, right? We start with a technical background, but we're problem solvers. There's so many things we can do and so many things we might find interesting. I ended up moving into customer facing roles, business development, product management later in my career. If you'd asked me when I was graduating with my PhD, would I want to do that? I'd think, no, that's not at all what I want to do. And yet I found it very interesting, a way to leverage my science background and do that. You asked about an entry role. I know there is a perception that sometimes you have to have humility. I've certainly heard that. I don't think that has to be the case. I certainly did not feel that. I was very pleased with my first role. But I think the difference is, from the outside, it's hard to know what you would do. It's sometimes the classic roles, job descriptions that are described may not fit us well, and that can absolutely give us that feeling. That's why I always say it's so important, looking for a job, to actually find creative ways to get in touch with the people in the companies. A lot of companies may not necessarily think we need a scientist for this role, because they don't necessarily appreciate what we bring to the table. But when you have a conversation with them that is, in short, what are you doing and what are the problems that you're having and where do you need some help? Sometimes the role for that is absolutely a scientist, even though it's not necessarily what they're thinking. I mean, I have had cases where I talked to an employer about a job opening they thought they had, and as they thought through what they really needed, they realized, in this case, oh, Dave, you are the person that we could use for that. It's a funny thing. Sometimes, well, there's an adage in the private sector that if you have time to hire somebody, you actually don't need them. And it's kind of a joke, but what happens is, when somebody truly does need to bring a new person on, especially if it's this higher level problem solving thing, sometimes they haven't really thought completely through exactly what they need. They just know something isn't getting done. And if we need somebody to solder circuit boards at technician level, that's easy. If it's the director asked us to move in some new direction, there's this product direction, we have customers for it, we don't yet know what the technology platform might be, so I need to hire somebody. Well, they may not have thought through exactly what person they need. And sometimes that conversation with someone who's looking really helps. It helps the job seeker, understand what the company needs, but it also helps the hiring manager really think through what are they looking for, because a more complex, sophisticated problem solving kind of job can be tough. When they learn that a PhD is someone they might be able to just give a fuzzy, not completely well-defined problem to, and they'll take it and run with it, all of a sudden a scientist looks like a great person to hire. So let's see. Have we covered?
So yeah, this was the question about the humility and finding a fit and starting at an entry level position that might not fulfill all of what you expected right after your degree. But what I'm hearing is first, be aware that job postings often won't fit you perfectly, and I don't think they fit any candidate perfectly.
That's true.
But so what I'm getting is, what's really important is that conversation you have. If you get an interview, is to really make that count. And my question is, and to follow up on that, is what is the key? Because I have a feeling that at an interview, you don't want to be too eager, but you want to show your presence. You want to be there. You want to show that you've done your homework. But how do you? If someone is having these questions about, do I need scientists? Like this person comes with a PhD. Is are they over, over
Overqualified or
qualified for
yeah.
this? Um, do you have like best practices for having like fruitful conversations when you're in this setting of?
So yes, this is an excellent question, because what I'm going to do is first I'll say I suggest you get in touch with them even before an interview. Because you're right, if you're in for an interview, the hiring manager has in mind probably a specific job. They've gotten it approved somehow, so there's actually a rec open and they can interview, and they probably have something in mind. Now, it's fine to come in and ask questions. You want to ask questions and better understand it. That is fine. Not to take control of everything. Obviously, they're the hiring manager, but it's totally fine to be asking questions, especially at a PhD level. Nobody's looking for to hire a PhD level person to tell them exactly what they're going to do. They want somebody who asks questions. They want somebody who takes charge of to a certain degree. But the best practice that I'll actually mention here is I really strongly recommend, and this is the only way I've gotten jobs, it's the way I've gotten all of my jobs, to reach out and connect with people even before you get to an interview.
Okay.
Sometimes even without seeing a job description. And I don't mean go to them with a CV or a resume in hand and say, hey, do you have a job? It starts with just exploring an area that you are interested in. I'm big on having a target. That's really where it starts. What do you want to do and where? Whether it's a technology, whether it's a market sector, an application. I love nanotechnology, or I want to make a difference curing cancer, or I want to telecommunications is a really interesting area. And you start meeting people in that area and asking about what they do. Ask lots of questions and understand. That's how you learn what are jobs in this area like. Informational interviews with people that are doing jobs you might think are interesting. You're not looking for a job. You're just saying, hey, you have made a successful career. You appear to have made a successful career in this area. I'm really interested in getting into it. I'm doing some research. Would you spend 20 minutes on a Zoom call, or can I buy you a beer and we talk about what's a day like? How did you get to where you are? What would you do differently? What was important in getting to where you are? But as you pursue these conversations, you find people who are in need, who are looking for help. Good managers are looking for help even before they have a rec open, right? Good managers are always, some say they're always recruiting and only occasionally hiring. They're always paying attention.
I love
This
it.
is the way to get good stuff. And so whether it's at a conference, at a meeting, go to an industry association, that's where you really do the research to find out what are these jobs about? What are companies doing? What are the new things they're developing? Because this is where they need a PhD problem solver, so that you get kind of that inroad. The last job that I got, I did see a job description, and I called somebody that I had come to know through something completely different and just asked about it. It wasn't a job I wanted, but I called him up and said, hey, it looks like you guys are hiring. And he said, yeah, I'm not really sure about the one you saw on the website, but I do know the VP of engineering is looking for somebody to solve this problem. I'll connect you and you guys can talk about what he needs. The job wasn't even posted, but
Wow.
I had a warm introduction. This is a game also, right? I can't say this is the right way or the formula to do this. It's just about finding people who are doing work in an area you're interested in, asking questions, meeting them, saying, who else should I talk to? And that's where you find those opportunities, even before you might get to an interview. That's the best practice that is most important.
And I'm with you 100%, and I think it's so enriching. And the what's interesting about it too is, excuse me. In the process of doing that, you'll also be learning some of the culture, some of the lingo, all little things that without you noticing, whenever you'll have that actual conversation about a position, you'll be so much better at just exchanging with that person in a productive way, in a language that they understand. It'll click right away.
Absolutely. That is so true. So to paint maybe the full spectrum here, job seekers who are just looking online, and online's powerful, right? We can do so much online. Feels like we ought to be able to just sit at our computer and do everything. but that can be so limiting. Actually, that's where people get the feeling that, oh, I'm overqualified. I'm not seeing the jobs that would fit me. But as you start to talk to people, you get all these things you're talking about, whether it's the culture, the lingo, you hear from people, and it starts to open your eyes to, oh, wow, I see this completely different. And you start to move down that spectrum to what it really looks like. And the whole job search seems different. It's a whole different activity, and it starts to look so much more like something that might work for you.
Yeah. So now, going back to what was the other part that and it connects really nicely with this. The other part that I wanted to talk about. You get this first position, which let's say it's not a position of leadership. You've already mentioned that one of the ways, if leadership and excuse me, there's some plumbing noise here. It's fine, but it's okay. I'm in my basement, and this is how it is. But
Okay.
so you said if you just show that you're a forward thinker, you're able to make decisions and take risks, you will be noticed.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'd really love you to expand a little bit about more is, because you know how it works, you've seen it, you've lived it. How does it work in a company? This thing of being noticed and of changing chairs. Let's say it could be horizontally, it could be it could be to another department, it could be to another role in the same department.
Mm-hmm.
How? Because I think there's a lot of unknown for people who are, let's say, in grad school on how about how evolution of a career, even within a company, works. Is it very strict? Is it very plastic? And I'm sure it varies from company to company,
Right.
but there must be some trends, right?
Yeah, I mean, excellent question also. So there is some variation, certainly. Larger companies tend to have more structure. Smaller companies, especially very small companies, very flexible, and you can kind of do almost anything. But there are some general trends. And again, especially at a PhD level person, maybe as a caveat, if somebody who's listening is working in a company, they say, well, it doesn't work at my company. Yeah, there are companies that don't appreciate the flexibility that a PhD might have, and maybe you're in the wrong company and want to look around. But generally, what I would say, the approach that has worked for me, and I think works for many, first important thing is do the job that, focus on the job that you're doing now and make sure you do a really good job at it. You don't want to spend too much time looking around. Do a good job, but ask questions and show an interest. I like to say, when I tell the story of my career, I started out working in a lab developing laser technology for products. But I like to say I kept sticking my head out of the lab, figuratively anyway, and asking, hey, this is great, but who is using these products? What are our customers doing with them? We're clearly, it's not the end game. They're doing something else with them. And I started getting invited to customer meetings, and that gives my boss, my manager, or the salespeople an opportunity to see me perform in a completely different environment. And they saw, wow, Dave seems to enjoy describing these products to our customers. Maybe, there's something new we could do. And somehow this depends on what your interests might be, but asking questions about what's the bigger picture for what it is you're working on shows your manager you're interested in more. And not every manager will be interested. Some have a very pigeonholed, structured idea. But the fact is, if you're a PhD, you probably want to work at a company that's somehow growing, somehow doing new things. A company that develops, I don't know, shampoo probably isn't doing a whole lot of R&D. I mean, maybe I'm wrong there, but there are certainly companies that don't grow a lot. But if you're at a company that does, your management ought to be looking for, how do we grow? And that means, how do we move people into new places, new roles, and how do we expand what we're doing? And those questions, showing an interest beyond just what you've been asked to do, shows that you have an interest in that. I think that's a great first step.
Yeah, and then I imagine this would happen in settings of like group meetings and things like that. So to just raise your voice, and if you have something to share that you think will add value, to not censor yourself and to just just offer it and see what happens.
Yeah, it might be maybe a suggestion of a recommendation when we have a problem or run into something, and it could be something that in the end your manager has to decide. But if
Hmm.
they're good at their job, they probably are looking for input on whatever that decision is. And say,
Hmm.
well, here are some things I'm thinking about, and
Hmm.
if you show you're good at that, they will appreciate that. And that also kind of highlights you as somebody who's thinking beyond just what they're doing right now.
And now, something that I don't know whether you have an answer for it, but is there if someone is evolving, let's say from like in this example that we said, from an R&D to something of more responsibility, of more leadership, uh, do companies typically send the person or offer the person training, or team management training or something like that, or is it something that you yourself should start working on if you're feeling okay, I'd love to go into a managerial position, but I don't have experience, managing a team of people.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that comes up?
Yeah, so I think both is going to be the short answer. I always think everyone should take responsibility for their own career. And again, especially at a PhD level, the hallmark is that you are independent somehow.
Yeah.
I think it's good to think of yourself as a consultant, even if you have a job, simply because that helps you focus on what do you bring. There was a time I was working at kind of an individual contributor role, and I wanted to move into more of a leadership role. And just on my own, I started listening to this podcast at the time. I think it was called Manager Tools, on my
Hmm.
own, doing my own kind of study and thinking about it. So I think that's important, and that's a great idea. But do companies provide that? Yes, in general. Now, usually larger companies have more of the resources to be able to provide formal training, but I have certainly worked with smaller companies that would, where the managers and the company in general would be open to taking courses or some kind of training, outside the company, and they might pay for it or support it or allow you time to do that.
Hmm.
Also, mentoring within the company. I haven't done a whole lot in terms of formal training, actually. A big part of it is actually working with a manager who is
Okay.
willing to coach you. That is
Yeah.
huge. I mean, if
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
back up to the story I told my first job where I started sticking my head out of the lab and asking questions, there I give a lot of credit to my manager. He was excellent at, he really took the groom a successor principle. Have you
Hmm.
heard of
Hmm.
this? It's
Hmm.
an important principle for a manager. Always be grooming a successor, because if you want to move on to bigger things, you need somebody who can cover for you.
Hmm.
He was really great when he saw I had that interest. He was really great at bringing me into those activities. And when I say activities, it could be anything. Traveling on a business trip with him to meet some customers and see what were they doing with it. Boy,
Hmm.
that is eye opening to see those conversations. Or pulling me into discussions of how did he manage the resources in the group from a headcount issue. How many, these are the products we have to develop, and these are the people we have to do it. How are we going to break it out? He gave me the task of trying to do some of that tracking, both so it provided input to him, but also it helped me see that firsthand how it was working.
Hmm.
Um, that's really valuable in a manager. And again, kind of like the caveat I said at the beginning, if you're working with somebody, for somebody who really doesn't do that, you might want to think about finding a way to move on, because
Hmm.
anything's fine for a short period of time, but if you
Yeah.
really don't think it's a good fit and they're not interested in you growing, because there are bad managers everywhere, uh, maybe it's good to move on, because
To
there
move.
absolutely are managers that are
Hmm.
interested in you growing and developing, and boy, that's such a
Hmm.
wonderful thing to have.
Yeah, and I've heard of this. Like, you can move on to another employer, but often, if it's a large enough organization, you can
Mhm.
be moving on within the organization to another department, and it can change. Your life can change completely just
Oh, absolutely.
internally.
Yeah, and that can even happen in a smaller company, depending on if a small company, again, if they're trying to grow, new things will come up. Who knows what new opportunity you can have to say, I'd be interested in taking the lead on that. And I've done that in a
Hmm.
company of 30 people, where something new came up, and I moved out from under who I was working for, either to another manager or to something where I was basically the lead myself to tackle. a new project, a new task. Small companies tend to be pretty flexible that way. So, yeah, whether it's a large company and you can just move into another existing organization that has a need, or whether you kind of find a new role, in some cases, create a new role. I
And
created a role at my last job.
for
I said,
yourself.
yeah, we need product management. We don't really have anyone doing product management. And I created the director of product management role for myself and, and moved into that.
There you go.
So, I mean, it really, how does this comes back to kind of the PhD problem solver. It's easy to think of problems as a problem I'm given in university to solve. Problems are way bigger than that. Problems can include, hey, we are trying to grow in this direction, and how do we do that? It's a very complex problem. We can be great at thinking of how to solve that and doing it, implementing it. That's what leadership is.
Yeah.
And if you have an idea, sometimes that gets you selected, hey, that's a great idea.
Pitch
How
it.
would you like
Yeah.
to lead that yourself? Help us figure out how to implement that.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you've got a new job, a new experience, a new thing to put on your resume, CV.
A new challenge, because often you hear
challenge.
this trope of, oh, I'm leaving academia. It's not going to be challenging. It's not going to be stimulating, and all the things you're saying, are kind of it's kind of proving the exact opposite.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's very challenging, very stimulating. It does look like that from the outside because we're used to, maybe from a science standpoint, scientific work, and the research won't be the same, and I won't be publishing papers with pages of math, or we think in terms of, honestly, have a narrow view of what intellectual stimulation is. It's all extremely important, very valuable, but there's it's a broader spectrum of problems to be solved, challenges to approach, things to learn. There's even a different kind of freedom. People often look at academia and think, oh, professors are free to go in any direction they want. Many times a PI will disagree and they say, no, I can only do things that will get funding.
Yep.
But the freedom in the private sector is not so, sure, you have to work on technologies that your customers are looking for. I mean, that does limit you somewhat. But all those problems within that are problems that don't have a right answer, and you are free to, many times this is what your management is looking for. How are you going to solve that problem? You're free to tell us what's the best way to do this. It's a completely different kind of freedom and a completely different kind of challenge.
Yeah. So it feels to me, and there's a last question that I'd like to ask, and actually I'm going to ask you if you have an answer to it, just to see if I follow that avenue or not, which is like typical errors that people do that kind of block them from accessing more leadership positions, things that they might be doing, habits they might be bringing from academia that are actually being counterproductive. Do you have an answer for this? And don't give it to me now because I want to.
Okay.
But do you have comments on
Sure,
on this?
absolutely.
Sure.
That's something. Yeah.
Perfect. But first, what I wanted to say is what it feels to me is the big plus from what you've said for PhDs wanting or discovering they want to access a position of leadership or influence within an organization. The key things that I hear, if I like distill it to, like, let's say 2 elements, it's creativity and problem solving skills, kind of both together, and which it makes a lot of sense to me. Well, you're nodding, so I guess you you agree. But before we go to this last little question that I want to ask you, because I think we've been very positive and I of how to, in the positive way, but what not to do, I think, is also important. We might finish with that because we're getting to the end of the interview. But I do want to take this moment for you to again. Let people know where they can contact you if they want to comment on something we've said, if they want to ask a question to go deeper into one of the points that you mentioned. Where do people find you online?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to find out about what I do, that would be my website, turningscience.com. And I see you're scrolling the link there. That takes to where you can get my book. The website, the root the domain is my website. That's what I do. The best place to reach me is on LinkedIn. That's
Okay,
where I'm most active.
perfect.
It's really a great platform for the kinds of things I do. And so feel free to connect with me. And I'm always happy to entertain questions and things.
And I can confirm David is very reactive on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
If you're interested in the book, again, it's called "It's a Game, Not a Formula." And if you go to turningscience.com/, it's dash a game that anyway, it's a game, not a formula, with dashes instead of spaces. You will get to the page, and you'll be able to order your book. Dave told me it's also available on other platforms like Amazon
Yep.
and on
It's
the
on
publisher.
Amazon.
So
Mhm.
if you look by his name and by the name of the book, you will find it. Again, for those who are just listening, all of these links, I will put them in the show notes of the episode. So to finish kind of the conversation,
Yeah.
what are like a couple of errors of mistakes people do in these first conversations, pivoting into industry that might be that might be actually working against them in terms of their career advancement and maybe accessing these positions of leadership?
Yeah. So and the answer comes from complaints I've heard from industry managers. So it's not
Okay,
just me
great.
guessing. This is what I've actually heard. You'd be surprised how many managers, because I ask this question a lot. How do
Hmm.
PhD scientists do? One of the biggest ones I've heard so many times and almost always verbatim, which is funny. They just say PhDs always have to be the smartest person in the room.
Aye, aye, aye. Okay.
And that doesn't work. And I hear that and I think, oof, I've done that. I've been there. And I understand why, because of the environment we're trained in. It's a competitive environment. You've always got other PhDs around you. There's kind of this competition, to be right, to be the most right, to correct other people if they're not right. Right. That's part of the game in an academic setting.
Hmm.
Boy, it does not work in the team environment of the private sector where everyone's got a different background and different skill sets. It's so that's the bad thing. Don't be the smartest. Be effective, not smart. I like to say that's the habit.
Hmm.
It's actually in my book. Be effective, not smart. And sometimes being effective means saying, "Oh, I don't know that. Can you help me learn that?"
Hmm.
It's not usually what we do. As a PhD, we usually go, "I don't know that. I better go learn it so I'm smart next time." Right?
Yeah.
But no, look for help. Be okay saying, "I don't know that. Can you teach me something?" That's a
Hmm.
big one. The other big one is being afraid to take that risk. And it shows in that you're afraid to answer a question if you don't really know the answer.
Hmm.
And it's okay to say, "Hey, I need to look and I'll get back to you," but you have to get back to them quickly. If it's,
Hmm.
that'll take 6 months, or, sometimes even 2 weeks is too long. You kind of have to know, what are they looking for? It's an environment where people are okay. Gambling is not the right word. Gambling feels too much like it's a thing of chance. That is
Of
not
course.
it. But it's the game. Most people in the private sector understand this is a game where we have to take a chance,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
An educated guess. Yes, we do research. Yes, we take the choice that we think is best, but without knowing. If you show that you can't play that game because, I don't know, I need a lot more time to be sure, that right there, that's a black mark. That shows, oof,
Hmm.
they don't get it. And most people, I say you can learn that, but most people looking at hiring you are just going to go, no, that's too much work. They don't get it. They don't even get it. Not only do they not have the habit, they don't even get that this is what we need. So those are the two biggest things. If you have to be the smartest in the room, not going to work for you. And if you can't take a risk, take a chance, take a shot, you know, if you
Hmm.
need to have the right answer, if you can't make a decision when there is no right answer, that's going to be tough too.
All right. That's makes a lot of sense. Even with stories that people told me. There's someone. I can't remember the person, but someone saying, "Yeah, I had a PhD, but the engineer on the floor who's been working 15 years on this machine or on this system knew so much more than me, and we had a great
Yes.
relationship and mutual respect, and my degree had no value in itself." Per se in this relationship. So no, it really really does make a lot of sense to me. So creativity, being able to take risks, and to not want to have all the data before putting some solution out there,
Yeah.
and so being a team player,
Mhm.
and not wanting to be the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. It's not too difficult, but it is something you need to keep in mind, because it might be a reflex you fall into even without knowing.
And that's exactly why the title of the book, to me, and hopefully to everyone else, that's the mnemonic, or that's the reminder of all those things. It's a game. Oh, right. Yes. I'm not looking for the right answer.
I love it.
Right. That covers so many of those things. I mean, my partner, she reminds me of this all the time. It's a habit that, she's a PhD as well in psychology, and we remind each other, right? It's a game, not a formula. Yes. Thanks for the reminder. Habits can be hard to break, but if you can find something that really encompasses all that, that's how you remember to stay in the game, and that's how you win the game.
Awesome. Well, Dave, this is a great way to finish. Kind of coming back to the book and to the name of the book. It's awesome. It's been great talking to you again. I'm super happy for you that the book is out. That you've and I'm super happy to have you here and to have been able to go through these questions, which, like I said, I hadn't covered in this depth on the show. And I really, really appreciate all the experience and all the know-how you bring on this. And so also I recommend, if you're listening, if you appreciate it, if you liked what you've heard, go get Dave's book. And again, it's on his website, turningscience.com. You'll find it there. It's a game, not a formula. And I really like how you made it all make sense in the end. I really love it.
Why, thank you.
And so thanks for having been a second time on Papa PhD, Dave. It's been a great pleasure. And for anyone watching, well, if you liked this, do like. If you're on YouTube, put a like on the episode. If you're not subscribed to the Papa PhD YouTube channel, these conversations come up, almost each week. Now it's summer, so there might be a little break. But yeah, we've just crossed 200 subscribers, which is super small in other contexts, but to me it's a milestone.
Yeah.
And follow Dave, on LinkedIn. He's also on Twitter. So we have messages we're putting out there. Following us shows us that the messages are listened and are useful. So if you can follow us, it'd be really appreciated. Dave, you have a last word?
I want to say thank you for having me back on here. You got a great show, and I'm happy to be part of it again. And hopefully this leadership topic kind of gives you a new direction to move into. It is important. So
yeah.
Thanks. It's been great talking to you. And just keep remembering it's a game, not a formula.
It is. It's a game, not a formula. I love it. Dave, thanks a lot, and all the best, and we'll keep in touch.
Thank you. Same to you.